So welcome to Unbroken, the safe place for male survivor podcast. Because every male survivor deserves hope, healing, support, and a BMW. And here's your male survivor, leadership coach, and hypnotherapist, Thomas Edward. All right, so welcome to Unbroken. Hey, this is for, of course, you male survivors out there, childhood sexual abuse. This is Thomas Edward, your male resiliency male survivor coach. Sorry, guys, something's going on with my throat. The weather's changed. Well, for a great change here in California. We had this kind of warm tick for a while, so it got hot, like 80s, 90s. And now we just got this cool spell, which came in, which is nice because it actually brought some rain with it, which is great, wonderful. I try not to complain whenever there is rain. But then it's like, you get your crops in, and then there are some crops that during certain stages of their growth, when they get too much rain, it just kind of... You're like, I'm probably going to have to replant those again. But hey, you know what? Just thankful that I have the opportunity to do that. All right. Shout out to Australia. Shout out to those in the UK. I get to see the stats of people that are listening. And so thank you so much for listening wherever you are. We're going to try to make it through whatever is going on with my voice here. So I've got my, cup of hot lemon tea here that I'm kind of sipping on. And, you'll notice me kind of clearing my throat. I'll try to hit the cough button like it just did right there. And we'll keep it pushing. All right. So for those of you that are trying to throw shade my way, it ain't going to work. Look, so if you want some of the smoke, I'll give you some of this smoke. But look, I do what I do because I want to help people. And so, I'm going by, of course, my years of experience doing this and also working on a degree in psychology and working with people and individuals. But just to let you know, for most of the 25 years I've been doing this on my own dime. So if you're going to try and tell me how to do the things that I do, I got some smoke for you. So in other words, do it your way, right? I'm doing it the way that I'm doing it. And so if you got a problem with that, sorry. But let me tell you, there are a lot of people that need help out in this world. And so you help people the way that you know how. All right. So that clears up hopefully and the person, if you're listening, this is directed towards you. So take it with if you want to say a grain of salt. Just learn to be kind to people, support people, and the things that they're trying to do to help other people. And just because it's not the way that maybe you would do it, doesn't mean that it deserves the shade that you are giving it. And so the reality is, when we're in this world, as we're trying to help people, be helpful. And if you have some comments that are not as helpful, then keep them to yourself. All right, that was my public service announcement. All right, so we're continuing our conversation for spouses, loved ones, family members that are dealing with someone who has been sexually abused. Okay, man, there's just so much to cover. So tonight, I was sitting with some friends, and so they were talking about one of their children, their spouses, was sexually abused as a child. They didn't get any help, and they're young. They're in their 20s. And so now the person that was sexually abused is at this stage where they're acting out, they're doing these different type of things. And of course, it's causing a little, havoc, and they're trying to understand what's going on with this person in their mind. And so we sat down and had, dinner, cooked dinner, and We had like a 3-hour just conversation. And my goal was to help them to kind of understand the survivor's world and where they were coming from. Now, the one thing you'll always hear me say, coming from a male survivor also, it's never right, even though we're experiencing what we are experiencing as male survivors, it's never right to mistreat other people. You're like, okay, well, we were mistreated. We're working through things. I get that. I understand that. But it's never right to mistreat, to abuse other people. Now, here's the thing. Oftentimes we don't realize that, right? And because we're searching for answer, we're searching for identity, there's confusion. And then often when this happens, of course, during early childhood, everything gets distorted, everything gets screwed. And so you're looking through these filters when you think about life. And oftentimes you don't even understand. It's like, why am I doing the things that I'm doing, right? Reenactment, those different type of things. Okay. So here's the thing is like for us as survivors, I'm going to say of sexual abuse, first of all, we have to make sure that we aren't, I'm going to say minimizing, I call it minimize and sanitize what happened to us. And then oftentimes we think, well, it wasn't that much. And so, all the individual did is that, they showed me, whatever, these porn magazines, whatever, at an early age. Okay, if your brain has never experienced that before, then that gives you what we would call an imprint is left on your brain, on your mind, right? And then whatever is going on during that time, that's the only thing that your brain knows in those formative years when it's developing. And so now as you get older and you're acting out and you're thinking, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Where is this coming from? Realize and understand how strong, we're going to say those formative years, that imprint that was there. So, oftentimes when I'm working with individuals, I'm like, well, it was just, a bunch of whatever magazines, whatever, under my mom's bed or my dad's bed. And I just got to see the pictures. And now they're trying to figure out and wonder out, why am I acting out in that way? Well, that was your introduction in your formative years to, let's just say, what sex was supposed to be, what it was supposed to look like. And then people are like, oh, no, but they didn't sexually abuse me. Well, actually, they did. And so oftentimes we think that, okay, well, it has to be, the physical act of someone, sexually abusing you. But, I work with people who have cases, when we talk about coercion where they were groomed and the people used, magazines and then before you know it, they're roughhousing, but then the roughhousing is leading to something. And so it's leading, we'll say, the child down this path, right? First, starting off with, okay, trust, being comfortable, and slowly edging it, of course, into something that's even more devastating. But once we get to whatever the perpetrator's, let's say, final goal is, all the stuff that happens along the way hurts just as well because it's still part of that process. And so we were just talking about that with the individual and just helping them to see that you can't minimize, if you want to call it the early parts of the grooming process that took place with this individual and say, okay, well, they didn't get all the way, so it wasn't sexual abuse. No, that's not how it works, especially when we're talking about, childhood. And so, just having that conversation, with them. And I even asked them, I'm like, what, tell your son he's more than welcome to, to come by, sit down, and we can have a conversation. But you guys just have to realize the partner and spouse that he has, this is the reason that many of those things that are taking place in their life. And so, we're going to have to make some decisions on what we're going to do. So, it sucks. It sucks, not just for the person who's been sexually abused, but for the person who loves them. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this series of podcasts is because, yeah, you might be the individual that's living with the person who was sexually abused, and you're like, I don't get it. Okay, well, that's what this podcast is here to try and help you guys. All right. So last time we talked about that we were going to talk about maybe you're with this person who is a survivor and you're just trying to understand them. But you just feel like, man, it feels like I'm always walking on eggshells. So if I had a title, which I guess I do for this one, that's like, okay, as the partner, the spouse, the loved one who's, living with, dealing with this survivor, you're like, man, I just feel like I'm always walking on eggshells. So then let's talk about that for those spouses, partners, loved ones, right? And you don't always say this out loud, right? But you feel it every single day. You just feel it like, yeah, I just feel like I'm walking on eggshells. And it's not maybe because the relationship is explosive. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's not because there's constant conflict, but the issue is there just seems to be unpredictability, kind of like we talked about in the first one. And so that unpredictability, that makes you start adjusting yourself. And so you start to really think before you speak. I mean, everything is like, measured, and you're like, ooh, should I say this? Should I not say this? And now you feel like you're not being true to who you are. You feel like maybe you're softening your tone, your time, your conversations. And then over time, you just stop showing up naturally, okay? Because it's affecting you. It's like, look, I don't want that smoke. I don't want that shade. And so then you just kind of stop. And so you become very careful. You become very measured. You become very filtered. Because no one wants to walk into an atomic bomb, right? Got to get my ear. And so here's what makes this, I'm going to say, so confusing. And this is the conversation I was kind of having with them to help their child. So you're trying to help the relationship, but you slowly actually start disappearing inside of the relationship. Now I'm going to, this is an individual I worked with, but this was from a brother's perspective, brothers, and how he felt, kind of dealing with, for him, a brother who had actually been sexually abused. And so this was kind of his view. So I'm going to share it with you now, if I can get this going.
I didn't notice it at first. It was subtle, just little things. Certain conversations would go sideways, not into a full argument, but something would shift. He'd get quiet or defensive or just gone. So I started paying attention, trying to figure out what set it off. Was it my tone? Was it the timing? Was it the topic? And once I started noticing patterns, I started adjusting. I'd think before bringing things up, like really think. Is this the right time? Is he in a good mood? How do I say this so it doesn't land wrong? And even when I did bring something up, I'd soften it. I'd say it nicer than I actually felt. I'd hold parts of it back because I didn't want to trigger anything. And for a while, I told myself that was just being supportive. But then I noticed something. I wasn't relaxed anymore. Even in normal moments, I was scanning, trying to read him, trying to stay ahead of something. And I realized I don't feel like myself anymore. I feel careful all the time. And the hardest part? He doesn't even know I'm doing it. He thinks everything's fine. But inside, I feel like I'm slowly disappearing. And I don't know how to stop that without making things worse.
All right. Now, maybe that's you like, whoa, Coach T, that hit that to a T. And that's where you are. And this was up from a brother's perspective who actually sent and shared what was going on. with him. All right, so let's do like we usually do. Let's talk about, the CSA root, kind of what's underneath this. Okay, and so this pattern, it doesn't start with the loved one, the spouse, or the partner. Of course, it starts with how his system actually learned to interpret the world. So let's talk a little bit about that system. So the nervous system. So the nervous system learned to scan for threat. So, and you guys have to realize how important the nervous system is. And you probably get sick of me saying nervous system, nervous system, nervous system. But remember, when an individual is in survival mode, it's often that nervous system. And that's why one of the reasons when I'm working with individuals, when they come, I just had someone's here for a retreat, we got to try and create safety first, right? Because the healing can't take place if there is not actually a place of safety, because this nervous system has learned to scan for threat, and especially in unsafe environments. And so what happens is the brain adapts to becoming hyper aware. Okay. Now, it doesn't, I'm going to say become hyper aware, not just for danger, but for potential danger. And you're like, but wait a minute, I love this person. I'm not, threatening. I mean, I love them. Yeah, but it's checking for potential danger. Remember, we talked about that amygdala, right? The high detective alert. So instead of relaxing into a moment, right, the system is constantly asking, well, what could go wrong? Now, realize, you're like, hey, Coach T, are you talking about the survivor? No, I'm talking about you, the person who's actually living with the survivor. So this is actually what's going on inside of you. And that's why, the brother said, man, I feel measured and I'm just trying to soften my tone, because your nervous system, let's just say there was a blow up, right? And so now your nervous system has learned, I need to scan for threats, because this might be an unsafe environment, not just for the survivor, but also for me. And so the emotional, we're going to say, signals of you dealing with this person becomes actually very unpredictable. Because what happens is when we're talking about abuse dynamics, so reactions are often inconsistent. And so sometimes you do something and nothing happens. But then sometimes you'll say something maybe a certain way and something does happen. And then sometimes things just escalate and you're just like, I just can't figure out what's going on. And then so the brain learns, you know what? I just need to stay alert all the time because I can't assume that it's safe. Now, this is you as a person dealing with a survivor, someone that you loved. But just to let you know, you're experiencing the same thing that the survivor does all the time. Okay. And when dealing with relationships with people, these different type of things. That's why I say it's a nervous system thing. And so now your nervous system is actually being affected. So the brain learns these things. So let's just say maybe tone or timing and expression, all these things become loaded. And so the small cues, I'm going to say, when you're having conversations, when you're watching the person, they actually start to matter. And so you're like, wait a minute, was there a change in the tone? I mean, your ears are picking up these things. Wait, what was that question about? Or, ooh, look at that look. And so your brain even starts keeping patterns, right? And this is why it's important to ask, questions. Oftentimes, when I'm doing, leadership training and we're talking about this, and I say you can't make the assumption, right? Because like there's a change in tone, or you see the look, and then your brain starts like, ooh, I've seen that look before. And then it goes into what's known as pattern recognition and association. It's like, ooh, I've seen that look before. And it goes back to the last time. Ooh, I know what that means. Now, it might not mean that. It means something totally different, but your brain is trying to learn how to survive. And so it's picking up these things and it's placing associations with them. Because those cues, once they get signaled, right, then something in you starts to actually shift, right? And so what's going on is we're trying to control, and control actually becomes a form of safety. Becomes a form of safety actually for you as the individual who's actually dealing with the survivor, right? And so you're like, well, if I can anticipate, if I can manage the emotional environment, okay, then I'm going to feel like I'm more in control, and then I'm going to feel like he's more in control. But the problem is when something feels unexpected or maybe emotionally charged, the system reacts, right? So it might be his system that reacts, even though you're trying to like check for, okay, I want to make sure that everything is in control. And so it's not because it's wrong. It's because it's just unfamiliar and it feels uncertain. All right. So that's kind of we'll say the CSA roots there. So what are some of the reinforcing factors? So, why this spreads, we're going to say, to the partner. And I'll share with you a little bit about that. You've got the same things going on with you kind of from a neuroscience perspective. And so, but here's where I'm going to say it becomes relational. And so you actually, I'm trying to put this in terms now, not total neuroscience terms, but so you start adapting his reactions. Okay. And so you notice what works and then you notice what doesn't. And so then what happens is you begin adjusting. So now you're adjusting your tone, you're adjusting your timing, you're adjusting your delivery. Because now your brain is doing the same thing. Your brain starts scanning too, just like the survivor's brain is scanning. And without realizing it, now your partner who was hyper aware, now you become hyper aware as well. And so then you start asking, okay, well, how do I say this so it lands right? And now you're starting to second guess yourself and the decision, just like the survivor does. Okay. So why? Well, you get rewarded for actually being easy. Oh, you know what? I want things to go calmly and smoothly. So I'm not going to ask the challenging questions or the tough questions. And so then when things go, hey, that worked out fine. When they go smoothly because you didn't say anything in your brain, then guess what? That just reinforces, right? Oh, this must be the right way. That's what your brain is saying. Okay, so I don't say that or I don't use that word instead of trying to have a conversation about it. So guess just what you do? Well, you keep doing it because it feels comfortable, pain, reward, right? And so then what happens is conflict avoidance actually becomes the goal, not resolution, not honesty, but your brain sees it as stability. Okay. And so stability becomes, you know what? We're just not going to rock the boat. All right, guys, got to get a cup of my tea here. All right. So let's talk about a little bit, real slightly. So what's the impact? Okay, the adult impact. What's this creating, right? And so over time, this dynamic is going to create, we're going to say, a very specific kind of relationship. And so the type of relationship it's creating with you and the survivor is it's one where the person regulates and the other reacts. Okay. So now in the relationship, you become the stabilizer, right? And he becomes the one who shifts. Okay. So you become the stabilizer and he becomes the one who actually shifts. When we talk about communication, okay, what's the impact? Well, now communication is filtered. It becomes filtered. And so you're not saying everything. So you're saying what feels safe to say, which is actually the same thing also that the male survivor is doing. Okay. The emotional distance increases. Okay, so that's another impact because, well, real connection, guess what it requires? It requires honesty, right? But here, honesty feels, a little risky. This might be a volatile, whatever situation. And so now this starts to become the norm, the emotional distance. I better not really say how I actually feel or what I feel about this. And then guess where this starts to lead? Starts to lead to internal resentment. Okay, so this internal resentment starts to build. Why? Well, because you don't express everything, but boy, do you feel it. And so now we talked about that before. Energy likes to be able to go somewhere, but now it's building up. It's getting locked in, right? And it has to go somewhere. Before you know it, either you're going to explode or something's going to happen. And then what also happens is you have, I'm going to say, this loss of self. And I believe this kind of is one of the deepest impacts. So like we said, well, why am I walking on eggshells? Well, because you're kind of losing a little bit of that part of self and you stop being you. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the neuroscience. You guys know me, and I'm not going to geek out on you on this one, but I think the neuroscience always helps us to understand. It's like, well, you're asking yourself, well, why does this feel constant? This doesn't feel like it's just relational. Well, that's because it's not. Okay, and if you're starting to notice, there's a neurological component on it, and that's the reason we start out by saying the nervous system. Okay, so now guess what? So now you're actually experiencing part of what the male survivor experienced. So you're in the hypervigilance loop. And so your nervous system, just like his nervous system, is scanning for threat. Your nervous system actually starts scanning the survivor, the male survivor. And so now you got both systems, both people are in this hyper awareness mode, but you're not present because you're always scanning for threat. Well, welcome to the world of the male survivor. Now this becomes part of your world as well. We talked about before the mirror neurons. So the mirror neurons in co-regulation. So humans, we sync with each other, and there's just so many things that goes on, like even the release of, different hormones and things, like oxytocin in the body causes us, to be able to cuddle and, to love people and to even accept people when they're being jerks to us. And so those mirror neurons in co-regulation, we start syncing. So if one system is tense, then guess what? The other one adapts. Okay. And so you start matching, we're going to say, the survival's internal state, right? So that's why you're hypervigilating also. I think I just made up a word, but hey, it sounds pretty cool. Hypervigilating. Okay. So then we've got chronic low stress response, and that's usually how it starts. And so even maybe there isn't, what we say a lot of conflict, your body stays slightly activate. So now you're just trying to think ahead all the time. You're trying to make sure that you're reading the cues and you're constantly adjusting your behavior. Well, that's not connection. That's management. Okay, that's management. We're going to say that safety becomes conditional. And so maybe you feel relaxed, but you only feel relaxed when things are going well or when you think that they're going well. So then your body learns, you know what? Relaxation depends upon the male survivor. It depends upon him. Okay, but now guess what has just happened? That's creating instability, right? Because if it depends on him, well, it depends on what mood, whatever he's in. And so if things are going well, okay, but if they're not going well, do you notice how that creates the instability? All right. So what are some strategies? What actually helps? All right. So Might help, might not. You know me, I try and give you several different things. That's the one thing, about coaching is like oftentimes I'll give my clients what I call them growth work assignments instead of homework assignments. And I say, okay, let's just try this out for a couple of weeks. Notice what works, doesn't work. Do we need to tweak it? Not tweak it, or maybe we need to do something, totally different for you because every individual is different. So we're going to say this is where, the partner, we're going to say needs to maybe reclaim ground without maybe creating, more conflict. And I'm going to say one of the things to do is to notice where you're actually filtering yourself, right? So I need you to start here. So not with the male survivor, the loved one who's the male survivor. Don't start with him. I need you to start with yourself, with you, right? And then just ask yourself, okay, what am I not saying right now that I actually feel? All right, now I'm a big journal guy, and so, you can actually put these down. I like to be able to look back and, I'm going to say gain information, but ask yourself, what am I not saying right now that I actually feel, right? Because then what we're doing is awareness is going to help us to actually break the pattern. Now, you're like, okay, thanks, Coach T, but we can't stop there, okay? So when we're thinking about the strategy, you have to start thinking also, okay, how can I bring back small pieces of honesty, right? Not everything at once, okay? Not everything at once, like, yo. And so now you're just going to be real and you're just going to be raw and you're just blasting on full mode and you're throwing shade in every direction and they're getting all this smoke because you are upset. Okay, so we have to bring back the small pieces of honesty because that's going to be too much for the male survivor. So small, but it needs to be grounded in truth. And you might just say things like, hey, you know what? I've noticed I've been holding things in. Now, notice the first thing that you did, you didn't say, well, you've been causing me to. Nope, you're taking responsibility, right? Because you're looping, because the other person is looping. You say, hey, you know what? I've noticed I've been holding things in. Now, by saying that, first of all, you've already taken away what we call the accusatory tone, right? And it's not confrontational because you're taking that upon and you're just sharing what you've noticed. That's why I said that journal is going to be important, right? And so you're being real. And when you do that, you're starting to bring in those small pieces of honesty back into. Now, as we're doing that, let's just say maybe we do and the male survivor that we love starts to react. We always have to stay grounded when someone else reacts. Oftentimes when I'm teaching, like in leadership classes and we're doing the whole communication piece, and I'll put something on the board, a phrase or something that says, it's about you even when it's not about you. And then I'll ask everyone, okay, what does that mean? And everyone's all over the place. And I said, so the key reality is the only thing that you can control is yourself. You can't control the reaction that's going to come from the other individual. You can only control how you're going to actually react. And so you want to make sure that you're staying grounded when the male survivor is actually reacting. This is really key, right? So if he shifts, you don't collapse or over adjust. You just stay steady. Okay. It's like, well, how do I do that? Okay. Well, first you might start out by saying, look, I'm not attacking. I'm just sharing. Okay. I'm just sharing that I've noticed I've been holding things in. Okay. So this is still all self-awareness, but you're sharing it. You're sharing it, let's just say in small pieces, but you're also keeping yourself grounded when the other person is actually reacting. Okay. And so what that does though is for the male survivor, when you do that, it actually models something new, maybe something that we haven't experienced before. So no, I'm not attacking. I'm just sharing. All right. Now, This one's an important one, and this is one often that when I'm working either, with, spouses, loved ones, whatever in the family, they're dealing with this. You got to make sure that you separate support from what I'm going to call self-erasure. Okay? So you can be thoughtful, you can be aware, and you can be respectful without becoming invisible. Okay. I hope that synced a little bit. You can be thoughtful, you can be aware, you can be respectful without becoming invisible, like we talked about before. Now you're not saying in anything because that's why you're walking on eggshells. No, when you're walking on eggshells like that, you're actually increasing the invisibility. We don't want that. Okay. So we can separate support from actually being invisible or self-erasure. Okay. I think let's see, one more I'm trying to think in my head here. Like I'm usually thinking about like actual cases and people that I've worked with. Okay. So we've got to also re-anchor, I'm going to say, in your own internal state. So what I mean by that, so instead of scanning the male survivor constantly, you have to come back to what am I feeling right now, right? And so what happens is, because you actually don't get it, but you're in survival mode, just like the survivor's in survival mode. But when you come to that and you're like, hey, wait a minute, but what am I feeling right now? So you're not being invisible. I'm feeling a little bit disrespected. Okay, so what you're actually doing is you're actually bringing yourself out of survival mode. So you're not just reacting, but you're thinking about what is actually happening. So when you're re-anchoring yourself, we're going to say, in your own internal state and what's going on. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, when we talk about from a coaching perspective, let's talk a little bit about the reality reframe. Let me get a sip of tea here. So I've had loved ones, I've had partners, they say, you know what? I don't even know how to just be anymore. And I'm going to say that's the moment that we slow everything down, because what's happening, it isn't, like we said, just about him. It's about what the relationship has trained you to become as the person who's dealing with the male survivor, right? And if that continues, well, you don't just lose connection, you actually kind of start to lose yourself. And no relationship can sustain that in the long term. And that's kind of the conversation I was having with the friends and them dealing with, their child who's married to the survivor. It's like, well, how do I'm like, okay, but as you're explaining some of these things to me, I said, what I'm noticing is that they're losing themselves, and then no one can actually sustain that on, we're going to say, long term. And then before you know it, now they're acting out, the survivor's acting out and it's just the whole, I'm not going to use the words that I want to show, right? So I just want you to think about this. Just kind of going to say, we'll call this maybe a closing reflection, if you want to think of it from, that perspective. If you feel like you're walking on eggshells, right? That's not you being too sensitive. Like, oh, maybe I'm just too sensitive, right? Once again, that's your nervous system responding to the unpredictability. And the goal is not to remove all tension, right? The tension is going to be there, but the goal is to kind of rebuild a space, and I'm going to call it a safe space. So a safe space where you can actually be honest without feeling like you're risking everything, right? And so remember, go back and look at some of those strategies, right? Because when we think about it, that's what real connection is. It is that place where we can be honest, where we can be truthful, and we don't feel like, ooh, this is risky. Maybe I shouldn't be stepping on those eggshells, right? Because that's real connection, right? And real connection doesn't come from me being hyper vigilant over whatever, super cautious. It's when I'm building a place of safety. Okay, place of safety. All right, guys, there we are. My goodness. It's so funny. I start out with these things. I'm like, yeah, I'll be, because I usually look at the neuroscience and they say people can usually stay engaged only about 20 minutes. And then I look down and like, oh, it's 40 minutes. And, but hopefully the information has been interesting enough where it's actually kept your brain actually going and you've been able to listen. And if not, you can always go back, rewind, push the button, play, and listen to it again. All right. Hey, guys, I hope that helped you. Those of you that are living with loved ones, dealing with loved ones and that were, abused, sexually abused. And remember that definition, oftentimes it's kind of defined so in the legal system so we can actually get a charge. But we've noticed just from the things that, we've encountered over the years, at least from an emotional psychological perspective, it involves so much more. And I think I did a list, might be up on the website on frequently asked questions or something like that. But hey, thanks for sharing this time with me. I'm trying to think what we'll talk about next time. I'm just trying to think about some cases in my mind. Maybe we'll talk about, maybe you feel like you keep having we're in the same argument and whatever, and nothing changes. I don't know. We'll see where we go. It just depends on what's on my mind as I'm thinking about, different, scenarios that take place for those that are dealing with the loved ones that are dealing with the male survivors. So, you know what, guys, I always say this to my male survivors that I'm working with, and this is hard sometimes. And I want you to even think about this from the perspective of the one who's actually dealing with the male survivor. And, I always say to my male survivors, I know this is hard for you to maybe grasp. I say, I just want to let you know that I care for you and I love you. And that's because that word love was used to actually maybe hurt you. But I'm trying to help you to see it's coming from a different place. It's coming from a place that is safe. And so I just want to say the same thing, to you for, first of all, I want to thank you for even just taking the time to listen to this. I want to applaud you for trying to figure out what's going on in this male survivor's life that you love and just let you know, how important that is for us, even if we don't realize it in the moment as we're dealing with it. This is so important. And I applaud you just for even just trying to learn this. There are, some people that have, male survivors in their life and they're just like, I don't even want to try to figure this out anymore. And like, they're gone. And so I applaud you for even taking the time to just try and find out more what's going on in our mind and in our world, and then realizing how it's affecting your world. All right, guys, till our next podcast. And so I guess that'll be in a couple of weeks because, guys, I got other things I'm doing on. So remember, if you're trying to throw shade and say, come on, T, you need to pump out more stuff, more information. Well, look, you've got the videos on the website and other things. And so, I think that's sufficient. And I try and answer the questions that actually, come in. And so, you guys, I just want to say, have a great week. Just know that there was someone here who actually cares about you. This is the reason that I do this. And you know what, guys? If I had millions of dollars, this is what I still would be doing. Right? This comes from my heart. This comes from me. This is part of who I am in trying to help individuals. So once again, guys, you know what? Be a fighter.